Hello everyone, I'm going to show a demo of the CCM. There are three parts of this demo. The first one is called Application, Component, and Instance Repository. The second one is called Initial Deployment, and the third one is called Scaling. Okay, let's go start the first one now, and I will start the repository. Here's a menu, and there are some options we can choose. Let's first view all the applications in the repository first. As we can see now, there's only one application, which is the Ruby's PHP application stored in the repository. If I want to view the profile of this application, I can type the name of it, and then here shows the profile of the Ruby's PHP. There are some fields in this profile. The first one is called the component name, which determines that what kind of components the application needs, and some specific version, for example. And then the third one is the legal compliance field, which means that when deploying this component in some specific location, whether this location has some constraints or not. And then the working directory and the command to run this components, and the next one is the usage field, which determines the order of the components of each the order of the deployment of each components in this profile. And then the last one is called the IP required field, which determines that when deploy this component, whether or not to associate some a floating IP address to this component or not. And then let's view all the components in the repository. And as we can see, there are four components stored in the repository. The first one is the web server load balancer. The third one is the second one is the database load balancer. The third one is a database, and the last one is a web server. If I want to view the profile of this profile of this component, I can type the name of it, and then here's some fields about this component. For example, the ID, the name, the type, image ID, and something else about this component. And then let's take a view at all the instances in the repository. As we can see, there's none instance in the repository because there are none application deployed in the working node now. So that means that there are none running Docker instances in the work node, which also means that there are none metadata of the running instance stored in the repository. But after deployment, including the initial deployment and the scaling, there will be some running instance metadata stored in the repository. We will check it later. So until now, the first part of this demo is done, and then let's go to the second part of this demo, which is the initial deployment. Let's start the CCM controller. The CCM controller will listen to some specific parts, and then when the client connect to the controller, it can type the name of the sorry, I typed the wrong name, so let me start again. It will type the name of the application, and then the location of the application where it wants to deploy it to the controller. When the controller receives the message, it will do some specific steps to deploy this application. The first one is called request mapping, which means it will search the repository to find whether this applications has stored in the repository or not. If it is yes, then go to check its profile to see what kind of components this application need and whether all the components are stored in the repository or not. This step is called component discovery. If they are all stored in the repository, and then it might select some specific version of the components, and that it will go to another step, which is the deployment of these components from back to end. First one is the database, and then the database load balancer, and then the web server, and then the web server load balancer. At the deployment, it will configure these components in the same order. At the configuration, it will deploy this C Advisor. C Advisor is a tool that we can use to get the resource usage of the Docker instances in the working node. And of that, it will assign the floating IP address to some specific components if it is required, and then it will store these instances metadata back to the repository. Of that, the initial deployment is almost done, and the server will return the IP address to the floating IP address to the system controller. But there's one more thing that the controller needs to do, and it's to start the CCM daemon in the working node. The CCM daemon is used for scaling. I will explain this later. So let's take a look at the client side. There's an IP address returned to this client, and if we type the IP address to the browser, and then we can access the Rubius application. And we can choose something we want to click. And then let's go back to the repository to see the instances now. So if I type 7 again, and as we can see now there are 4 new instances installed in the repository. Previously it's none. So now there are 4 new ones. And if I want to view the profile of these instances, I can type into it, and then here's the profile of the of this instances of the web server load balancer instance. There's some instance ID, name of it, and the IP address of it. There are 2 IP addresses of the of this instance. The first one is the initial IP address, and the second one is the floating IP address, which is the external IP address. And the last field is called the host, which means that this instances is deployed or is running in this host with this host name. And then until now, the second part of this demo is done. And then let's go back. Let's go continue to the third part of this demo, which is the scaling. So at first, I need to start the collector. The collector is running in some specific port. It's listening on some specific port. It will receive them the data from the metric collector of each running working node. If there are some instances running in this working node. So as we can see now, previously there was the 4 instances are all running in the AGC7. So if I start the metric collector, it will get the the metadata of this the resource usage of the instances, and then it will send the this data to the collector. In the collector part, there are two kinds of values. The first one is the individual value. It's from the each individual host, and there's another value is called the aggregated values. So because now there's only one host, the aggregated values is the aggregated value of the HG7. And as we can see in the, let's go back to the metric collector in HG7. There are three values each line. The first one is the timestamp, and the second one is CPU usage of the web tier, and then the third one is the CPU usage of the database tier, because currently there are no workload here, so the CPU usage are all 0. And then let's start the workload. Okay, I start the workload. So as we can see now, there are some CPU usage. There are some changes of the CPU usage here, and here this is the collector part. The collector will put all the CPU usage in the aggregated value of the CPU usage is put here in a log file. And so let's start the prediction. The prediction code is getting the CPU usage from the log file, which is generated by the collector, and then it will make some predictions. The first one is, there are three kinds of values here. The first one is the timestamp. The second line is the web tier, and the normal means that the prediction results is normal. And the third thing is the current CPU usage. And the last one is there are 60 predicted values in future. So, and then there are also the because this one is a web tier, and then this one is a database tier, and they have the same meaning here. As we can see now, these workloads are just normal, so it will not trigger, the prediction code will not trigger anything. But when it detects the overload, it will trigger the scaling. It might take some time. So when we are waiting for that, let me explain the prediction results. And okay, I will explain it later, because now there are some abnormal here. So it will send the abnormal message to the system controller. When the system controller gets the abnormal message, it will go start the scaling. There are two steps about the scaling. The first one is that it will add another web server in another host, HGC12. It has this IP address, and if it is succeed, and then it will go back. It will go to the second part of the scaling, which is the to change the to reconfigure the HA proxy. The HA proxy is running in HG7. It has this IP address. So now, as we can see that the two steps are both succeed. Scaling succeeds, and HA proxy reconfiguration succeeds. So now we can start the metric collector in the HGCC12. So it will get the CPU usage per tier like what it did in the HG7. as we can see here, there's only two values, each line, the timestamp, the CPU usage of the web server, and then there's no value about the database server, because we only started the web server in the we only added a web server in the AGS12. We have not scaling any database component in the AGS12. So there's only one web server running in the AGS12. So let's go back to the collector. So in the collector part, as we can see, there are three values here. The first one is the first two. There are two individual values, and the third one is called the aggregated values of the two individual values. And now the collector will put the aggregated values in a log file, and then the prediction code can also read the log file and make some predictions. As we can see now, in the prediction code, the predicted results are all normal here, so there are no overload here. So which means that the scaling is succeed. And don't forget about the repository. Let's go check the all the instances now. As we can see now, there are 5 instances here in the repository, not previous 4. Previously, at the initial deployment, there are 4 running. There are 4 running Docker instances. So, and after scaling, we start a new Apache. So, and compare with that, this is the new Apache has been started using after scaling. If we want to view the profile of this instance, as we can see now, it has some fields here, and in the host field, it is actually running in the AGS12. So until now, the scaling part is done. So which means that all 3 parts of this CCM project is done. Thanks for watching.